close your eyes, and you're back in the 1980s. A world buzzing with neon lights, cassette tapes, and Saturday mornings that smelled like sugar and freedom. Gas was under $1, your Walkman was your best friend, and the mall was the center of the universe. You didn't scroll, you waited. You didn't stream, you recorded. And somehow it all felt bigger, brighter, and more alive. This was the decade where everything had its own magic. And today, we're unlocking 100 forgotten things from 1980s America. The 1980s weren't just years on a calendar, they were a feeling. A time when fun lived in neon lights, cardboard VHS sleeves, and the sound of quarters clinking in your pocket. Every Friday, every Saturday, every summer break. It wasn't about what you had, but about the moments you squeezed out of the simplest things. Remember when Friday nights felt like an event all by themselves? You didn't need tickets or streaming apps, just a trip to Blockbuster. You'd walk through those glowing blue doors, scanning shelves, hoping the last copy of your movie wasn't already rented. VHS tapes stacked like treasure, late fees hanging over your head, and a little yellow sticker that reminded you to be kind, rewind. Saturday mornings? That was pure freedom. Cartoons weren't just shows, they were rituals. You poured a mountain of cereal, sat cross-legged on the carpet, and disappeared into G.I. Joe, Thundercats, and back-to-back commercials for toys you begged your parents for. The smell of sugar and the sound of jingles filled the room, and nothing could pull you away until noon. Music didn't stream into your ears. You hunted for it, finger on the pause button, waiting for the DJ to stop talking so you could catch that perfect song off the radio. If you nailed it, you felt like a genius. If you didn't, well, Casey Kasem's voice bled over the intro, and you had to live with it. Arcades were electric. Quarters jingling in your pocket, joystick in your hand, Pac-Man chomping across the screen. The air buzzed with synth music and button mashing. And if someone beat your high score, you didn't pout. You stayed until you took it back. McDonald's wasn't just a pit stop, it was a revolution. In 1983, Chicken McNuggets took over the menu in the world. Crispy little bites dipped in barbecue or honey mustard, stolen out of the box before they cooled. One taste, and you were hooked for life. Summer meant packing the car, rolling down the windows and heading south. Florida, Disney, Daytona, or maybe just a cheap motel with a pool. Road trip bingo kept you busy, peanuts from gas stations kept you queasy, and when palm trees finally came into view, it felt like magic. Home in the 1980s wasn't about luxury, it was about comfort. The dream wasn't a mansion or marble floors. It was a front yard big enough for kids, a backyard where summer came alive, and a second bathroom that felt like pure gold. A typical house cost about $80,000. 3 bedrooms, wood cabinets in the kitchen, shag carpet in at least one room, and a slip and slide stretched across the lawn when the weather was warm. It wasn't fancy, but it was freedom, and it was yours. And when Christmas came, nothing beat the Sears wish book. Hundreds of pages filled with toys, gadgets, and dreams. You circled everything with a red pen, folded the corners, and left it out where your parents might accidentally see it. Half the fun was flipping through it again and again, planning what Santa might bring. Gas stations had a kind of magic too. When prices dropped under $1, signs flipped to 89 cents, and drivers cheered like they'd won the lottery. The attendant still washed your windshield, making every trip feel like a victory. Inside, every family had a photo wall. Awkward school portraits, glamour shots with soft lighting, and your uncle's perm framed in wood. If you stood still too long in the living room, someone might hang a picture of you next. And outside, thirst wasn't quenched with bottles or filters. It was the garden hose. Cold, metallic-tasting water passed from kid to kid. No one worrying about BPA or germs. It was childhood in liquid form. Technology even crept into living rooms. Clap once, lights off. Clap twice, lights on. The clapper turned every family into magicians, at least until the dog sneezed in the middle of the night and the lights flipped on. The average salary was about $17,000 a year, and somehow it stretched farther than you'd think. Enough to keep the house, the food, the car, and still a little left for Friday night fun. Life wasn't extravagant. It was steady, simple, and unforgettable. The 1980s didn't just play out. They exploded. Music, food, fads, and gadgets hit like fireworks, changing the way you dressed, ate, played, and even passed secrets in school. Every year seemed to bring something bigger, brighter, and bolder than before. In 1981, MTV launched with the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll." Suddenly, the world had color turned all the way up. Music videos weren't just background, they were the main event. Bands didn't just have to sound cool anymore. They had to look cool, and you sat glued to the screen, hypnotized, deciding which style you were going to copy next. After school, nothing tasted better than a greasy burger wrapped in foil. Fries came in paper bags, milkshakes bent your straw, and you stuffed ketchup packets in your pocket like they were gold. It wasn't fast food, it was fuel for childhood, but not every experiment worked. In 1985, Coca-Cola launched New Coke, changing the recipe of America's favorite soda. People revolted. Protests, complaint letters, angry phone calls. 3 months later, Coca-Cola caved and brought back the original. This time they called it Coke Classic, a failure so legendary it became part of pop culture itself. School had its own traditions. You didn't text. You folded notes into tiny origami shapes, slid them across desks, and marked them read now. If the teacher caught you, straight to the trash can. And if they read it out loud, goodbye dignity. At home, something else was changing. In 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System arrived in America. Suddenly, Mario wasn't just a plumber, he was a hero. Duck Hunt, Zelda, Punch-Out. Games came in gray plastic cartridges that you blew into to make work. When they finally loaded, you vanished into whole new worlds. And at school, it wasn't enough to have notebooks. You needed a trapper-keeper. Loud colors, Velcro flaps, matching folders. If yours had unicorns or race cars, you were basically royalty. Every rip of Velcro made heads turn, and in that moment, everyone knew who ruled the classroom. The 80s didn't just give you pop culture. It gave you explosions, bright, messy, unforgettable, and you were right there in the middle of it all. The 1980s were a tug of war between wonder and heartbreak, between gadgets that felt like magic and moments that stopped the whole country cold. At home, at school, and on the screen, the decade swung from laughter to tears and back again. At home, VHS tapes ruled the living room. You recorded movies off TV, labeled the spines with black marker, and stacked them by the VCR like a personal library. But if someone taped over your movie night, that was grounds for war, and there are still dusty boxes in basements filled with half-labeled archives of sitcoms, commercials, and forgotten favorites. The family car wasn't sleek. It was sticky. Vinyl bench seats that clung to your legs, windows you cranked by hand, and seatbelt buckles that branded your skin in summer. No airbags, no cup holders, just your dad saying, "We're not stopping until we get there." Then came the moment that broke America's heart. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off with teacher Krista McAuliffe aboard. Millions of kids watched it live in classrooms. What was supposed to inspire became a tragedy no one could forget. Silence fell across the country, and for once, TVs didn't bring escape, they brought grief. But the decade also lit up with innovation. In 1981, IBM released the personal computer, a beige box that looked like a tiny spaceship. By 1984, Apple fired back with its iconic Super Bowl ad, the one where a woman in red hurled a hammer at Big Brother and changed tech forever. The future had officially moved into the living room. Even the ceilings had a signature. Popcorn ceilings, those bumpy frosted patterns, covered houses everywhere. You stared at them while lying on the floor, flicked Nerf darts up to see if they'd stick, and most of the time they did. Thursday nights were sacred. The Cosby Show, Cheers, Family Ties. You planned your week around them, because if you missed an episode, tough luck. Spoilers weren't called spoilers yet, but you still begged someone at school to fill you in without ruining it. And in 1982, E.T. phoned home, and every theater turned into a river of tears. You cried, your parents cried, even your big brother cried. For once, nobody hid it, because sometimes the 80s didn't need to be bold or loud. Sometimes it just needed to remind you how the 1980s were a decade of contrasts. Simple lives powered by big ideas, childhood thrills unfolding against world-changing headlines. One moment you were in a theater crying over a movie, the next you were watching history unfold on the evening news. It was a decade where popcorn, pixels, and politics all felt larger than life. Thanks to E.T., Reese's Pieces suddenly outran M&M's. Every kid begged for a box, hoping for a glowing finger and a BMX bike to go with it. Candy wasn't just sweet, it was a ticket to belonging. Groceries didn't drain your wallet. $60 fed a family of 4. Milk hovered around $2, bread under $1, ground beef just over $1 a pound. You could fill a cart without breaking a sweat, and coupons were just a bonus, not a lifeline. In 1987, The Simpsons arrived on the Tracy Ullman Show, squiggly, rough, not yet polished. But Bart already had attitude, Homer was clueless, and nobody guessed that yellow cartoon family would outlast everyone else on TV. 2 years earlier, Top Gun had redefined cool. Fighter jets, volleyball on the beach, Tom Cruise with a bomber jacket and aviators. The soundtrack looped in your head for weeks. Suddenly everyone wanted a motorcycle and a wingman. But then came 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. A concrete line that had split the world cracked open, and even American kids felt it. For years, movies and drills warned about the Russians. Suddenly Reagan's words, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," weren't just a line in history. They were real. Back home, the Ford Escort ruled the road. Boxy, simple, reliable, painted in colors like mustard yellow or seafoam green. Moms drove them to the store, teenagers crashed them in ditches, and if you got one as your first car, you were set. In 1983, Microsoft Word arrived. No more typing pages twice because of one mistake. No more bottles of whiteout. Suddenly you could edit, save, and print. It felt like wizardry, especially if your house actually owned a printer. Road trips meant fold-out maps the size of your windshield. The glove compartment was stuffed with old ones, each a souvenir of past vacations. Couples fought over exits. Kids asked, "Are we there yet?" And if you arrived without getting lost, it felt like a miracle. In 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark turned Indiana Jones into the adventure hero of the decade. The whip, the hat, the snakes. It made archaeology cool for the first and probably last time in history. By 1984, the Game Boy bundled Tetris with its falling blocks and hypnotic music. The pieces sped up, your heart raced, and at night you swore you still heard that tune echoing in your head. Social life didn't live in your pocket. It lived in a little black address book, a wall calendar covered in scribbles, and an answering machine that beeped like a microwave. If someone missed your call, they called back. That was social media, and somehow it worked just fine. And when the weekend came, there was only one place to be. The mall, the teenage kingdom. Walkmans on your belt, Orange Julius in hand, neon clothes glowing under the lights. You didn't just shop there, you lived there. The suburbs in the 1980s had their own kind of magic. Life wasn't about rushing or scrolling. It was about little rituals, neighborhood rhythms, and the places that felt like kingdoms. From the mall to your own living room, everything carried its own sense of wonder. At the mall, freedom came with a Walkman clipped to your belt, an Orange Julius sweating in your hand, and a pit stop at Spencer's Gifts to laugh at lava lamps and questionable t-shirts. You didn't need a passport. The mall was its own universe, and when you wanted to remember it all, you loaded a roll of film, sent it off, and waited days for glossy prints to come back. That envelope of photos was treasure. Blurry, crooked, sometimes overexposed, but every picture was proof that the moment mattered. Money wasn't plastic yet. Cash ruled. You kept it in a nylon Velcro wallet that ripped open loud enough to silence a room. Coins jingled, bills folded, and somehow that wallet made you feel richer than you were. Every living room had a giant wood-paneled TV. It weighed as much as a refrigerator, needed 2 people to move it, and wore rabbit ears wrapped in foil. Sometimes you smacked the side to fix the picture, and most of the time it worked. Your t-shirt wasn't just clothing, it was identity. If it said Van Halen, AC/DC, or Journey, that was your crew. You ironed it flat, wore it thin, and never threw it out. Concert shirts weren't fashion, they were proof. Then the microwave arrived, and dinner changed forever. Salisbury steak, Burritos, leftover coffee, you could zap it in seconds. No waiting for the oven, no pots and pans, just a few buttons and a ding. The future had moved into the kitchen. Reagan was everywhere. His voice, his optimism, his morning in America. He made jelly beans presidential, turned speeches into performances, and even people who disagreed couldn't ignore his Hollywood delivery. And then there were the toys. In 1983, Cabbage Patch Kids took over. Parents fought in store aisles, shelves went bare, and each doll came with its own name and birth certificate. Owning one wasn't just fun. It was proof that your parents survived the battle. School lunches had their own legends. Rectangular pizza, lukewarm milk in cartons, and a fruit cup with a peach slice floating in syrup. You ate it under fluorescent lights on a plastic tray, and somehow it was still the best part of the day. And in every neighborhood, one mom had the Kool-Aid pitcher. Sugar dumped in by feel, stirred until walls went sticky, and poured into Dixie cups that turned your tongue purple. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't measured. It was summer in a glass. The 1980s were loud, bold, and unapologetic. Every outfit, every gadget, every place you went seemed to make a statement. Whether you were lacing up your jelly shoes or unfolding a gas station map, the decade had a way of turning even the simplest things into adventures. At every gas station, maps were free. You grabbed one from the rack, asked the clerk for advice, and unfolded it across your lap. No GPS, no apps, just paper creases and guesswork. If you took the wrong turn, that's how adventures happened. Roller rinks were the place to be. Disco lights flashing, fog machines humming, and Madonna or Foreigner blasting through the speakers. If you held someone's hand during the slow song, it basically meant you were dating. Bonus points if you didn't fall flat on your face. On the streets, boom boxes were the soundtrack of the decade. Big, heavy, slung over a shoulder, blasting Run DMC or Springsteen on cassette. If your batteries died mid-song, you either swapped them out or you held a funeral for your street cred. Tech was booming. In 1982, Time magazine named the computer its man of the year. Beige boxes showed up in offices, classrooms, and homes, and nobody quite knew what to do with them yet. But everyone agreed they were the future. Even your shoes felt futuristic. Velcro straps replaced bunny ears and double knots. Just strap and go. They made you feel fast, even if you still tripped over your own feet. Then came Laserdisc. Shiny, oversized, and promising movie-quality magic. Problem was, it cost a fortune and barely fit on your shelf. Most folks stuck with VHS, but if your friend had a Laserdisc player, you knew their dad worked in tech, and sometimes the simplest inventions won. In 1980, Post-it notes appeared, bright yellow squares you could slap anywhere. Suddenly, fridges, desks, and bedroom doors were plastered with little reminders. Parents had a new way to say, clean your room without ever raising their voice. Commercials weren't background noise. They were the show. Jingles stuck in your head for weeks. Mascots became celebrities, and Saturday mornings meant cereal ads that made you beg your parents in the grocery aisle. There was no skipping. If you wanted to fast forward, you needed a VCR. Even travel felt different. Airlines offered hot meals on trays, legroom you didn't need yoga to enjoy, and wings for kids pinned on by smiling pilots. Flying felt like an event, not a chore. Back at home, perms ruled. Big fluffy curls filled classrooms, kitchens, and family photos. And if you had bangs, they were teased straight up with Aquanet until they could block radio signals. On playgrounds, jelly shoes hit like neon raindrops, translucent, glittery, and squeaky. They pinched, they melted in the sun, but if your feet sparkled purple, you were the coolest kid at recess. In 1980, CNN launched the first 24-hour news channel. Suddenly, news didn't stop after dinner. It was constant around the clock. For better or worse, Americans now worried in real time. And through it all, kitchens glowed with Tupperware. Bright orange, avocado green, mustard yellow. Lids never quite matched, but somehow every family had drawers full of it. The sound of a Tupperware burp. That was the seal of the decade. The 1980s had a way of turning the ordinary into legend. A plastic toy, a board game, even the way you left a message, everything carried its own story. Some things frustrated you, some made you laugh, and some just stuck with you for life. Take Tupperware. Every kitchen drawer was stuffed with it. Bright colors, round containers, and lids that never seemed to fit the right bowl. Opening the drawer felt like solving a puzzle, and half the time you lost. The Pepsi challenge was everywhere. Malls, grocery stores, even county fairs. You sipped from 2 unmarked cups, declared your favorite, and walked away with a button that said, "I took the challenge." Most folks didn't care which one won, they just wanted free soda. Your calculator wasn't sleek, it was a brick. Rubber buttons, solar panels that barely worked, and the forbidden thrill of typing 5808, turning it upside down, and giggling at your own genius. Fashion even invaded workouts. Neon leg warmers, headbands, leotards. Thanks to Jane Fonda, aerobics turned every living room into a stage. You didn't just exercise. You looked like you were auditioning for a synth-pop video. Books weren't always straightforward either. Choose Your Own Adventure made every page a gamble. One choice, you're a detective. 5 pages later, eaten by space squids. You kept your finger marking the last page so you could cheat your way back. Because the multiverse needed you alive. Even game night had its battles. Trivial Pursuit took over living rooms. One minute you felt like a genius. The next, the arts and literature category humbled you in front of the whole family. Arguments over answers could last longer than the game itself. Answering machines were the voice of your house. Tiny cassettes recorded missed calls, sometimes with a robotic tone, sometimes with your dad saying, "Leave a message after the beep." If you were lucky, he even made up a jingle. Calling home just to hear your own voice on tape. Admit it, you did it. And then there was the Rubik's Cube. 6 colors, endless frustration. You twisted and twisted until you gave up, peeled the stickers off, or swore you almost had it. Solving one without cheating made you a legend in the hallway. When you weren't home, the payphone was your lifeline. A quarter got you a local call, and every gas station or street corner had a scratched-up metal box with a dangling cord. Forget the number? Hope you remembered the phone book chained to the booth. Even video games came with limits. You didn't stream them, you didn't save them. You rented a cartridge from the corner store or Blockbuster. 48 hours to beat it or start over. And if someone else rented it first? Tough luck. On your wrist, the ultimate badge of cool, a Swatch watch. Neon colors, jelly straps, sometimes 2 stacked at once. They didn't just tell time, they told the world who you were. The 1980s were loud, bright, and unforgettable. Fashion sparkled, classrooms buzzed, and even the way you took photos carried its own kind of magic. Some memories were awkward, some hilarious, but all of them are burned into the decade forever. On your wrist, neon swatches ruled. Jelly straps, bold colors, sometimes stacked 2 at a time if you were feeling daring. They smelled faintly like plastic and strawberry lip gloss, and they went everywhere with you. The mall, the arcade, even church. Hair wasn't subtle either. Crimped zigzags, teased bangs held high with Aquanet, scrunchies pulling ponytails to the side. Add glitter lip gloss and a neon outfit, and you weren't just ready for school. You were a fashion icon of the playground. Class photos were their own special chaos. You put on your best sweater, tried to tame your bangs, and stood on bleachers while the photographer yelled, "Say cheese." Half the class blinked, someone made bunny ears, and not a single kid looked the same direction. Even your pencil case was a treasure chest. Erasers shaped like ice cream cones, footballs, and cartoon characters. They didn't erase well, but they smelled like bubble gum, and trading them at recess felt like a stock market for kids. Movie theaters weren't polished megaplexes. They had sticky floors, glass ticket booths, and seats with no cup holders. You smuggled in candy from home, leaned sideways if someone tall sat in front of you, and still felt like you were part of something magical. Polaroid cameras made every photo an instant keepsake. One click, one flash, and you shook the little square like you were casting a spell. Slowly, a blurry face appeared. Crooked smiles, red eyes and all. No filters, no retakes, just one chance, one memory, and a fridge covered in them. Lyrics weren't always clear either. You guessed them, sang them wrong, and swore you were right. Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza made sense until someone corrected you, but even then, you weren't convinced. And when weekends came, the neighborhood turned into a market. Parents laid out blankets covered in old lamps, toasters, and coffee makers, sipping from foam cups while they haggled. You set up a lemonade stand, sold Dixie cups for a dime, and hoped someone bought your old toys. The 1980s were built on rituals. Some belonged to classrooms, some to holidays, some to the shows and movies that glued families together. They were moments you didn't just remember, you felt them in the air, in the smell of chalk dust, in the sound of a rewinding tape. In 1984, Ghostbusters mania took over. Kids drew the logo on notebooks, quoted lines in the cafeteria, and begged for the plastic proton pack with the foam blaster. If your parents bought you one, you were instantly the coolest kid on the block. Typing wasn't second nature yet. You learned it with Mavis Beacon. Clunky beige keyboards, finger by finger, letter by letter. When you finally hit 30 words per minute, it felt like you could run a company. Classrooms had their own smell. Pencil shavings, chalk dust, and peanut butter sandwiches packed in brown bags. The teacher had a squeaky globe, a pull-down map, and a film strip projector that made you royalty if you got to operate it. Every fridge was decorated with alphabet magnets. Kids spelled silly words, adults stuck up grocery lists, and somehow QZ or the second E always went missing. The pencil sharpener was a weapon of chaos. Bolted to the wall, you cranked it like an antique machine, and half the time it turned your pencil into a tiny spear, or worse, chewed it to pieces while the whole class listened. Halloween meant pillowcases full of candy and those sweaty plastic masks. Your breath fogged up the eye holes, your face dripped with sweat, but you powered through, because that full-size Snickers bar wasn't going to earn itself. In 1987, Full House arrived. Corny jokes, hugs at the end, and a house that magically fit 3 grown men and a gaggle of kids. Before long, You Got It Dude was in every schoolyard. Christmas wasn't on demand. Specials aired once a year. Rudolph, Frosty, Charlie Brown. Miss it? Tough luck. You circled the date in the TV guide, popped popcorn, and piled under a blanket with your family, knowing you had to savor it. And if you wanted to feel futuristic, you cracked open a can of Tab. Pink, weird tasting, slightly radioactive in vibe. It was diet soda for people who wanted to feel ahead of their time. School lunches were carried in plastic lunchboxes with matching thermoses. Scooby-Doo, Transformers strawberry shortcake. Forget to screw the lid tight and your soup leaked all over your PB&J. By noon, everything tasted like tomato. And at the rental store, VHS tapes came with one moral law. Be kind, rewind, forget. And you didn't just get a fee, you got a glare from the clerk that made you promise to never forget again. The 1980s weren't just about trends or technology, they were about the little things. The details that filled your days, cluttered your drawers, and etched themselves into memory. These weren't just objects or habits, they were the rhythm of a decade. Stickers were everywhere. Fuzzy ones, glittery ones, scratch and sniff. You plastered them on your lunchbox, your binder, even your bedroom mirror. Peel one off wrong and ruin it? That was devastation. Basically vandalism. The mall food court was a weekend tradition. A tray piled with pizza or orange chicken, napkins stacked high, laughter echoing off tile floors. Afterward, you'd wander into the arcade or Spencer's Gifts. Shopping was just an excuse. Life happened in the food court. At school, your folder made a statement. Lisa Frank's neon dolphins and rainbow tigers, or the A-Team's muscle cars and machine guns. There was no in-between. Your folder was a trophy, a personality test in paper form. Movies gave you more than stories. They gave you blueprints for the future. Back to the Future made hoverboards, flying cars, and futuristic Pepsi Field just around the corner. All you needed was plutonium, a DeLorean, and a mall parking lot. If you wanted to see a movie, you grabbed the newspaper. Pages of tiny print, circles around showtimes, and a call from the kitchen phone to see which friend's mom could drive. Simpler, slower, and somehow sweeter. On playgrounds, kids bent blades of grass between their thumbs, whistling sharp squeals that drew crowds. It never worked on the first try, but when you finally nailed it, you felt like a wizard of sound. And in 1984, sneakers changed forever. Nike signed Michael Jordan, and the Air Jordan era began. Shoes weren't just shoes anymore, they were status. And if yours were scuffed, you were crushed. Phone numbers lived in your head. Friends, grandparents, pizza delivery. Lose that little address book or Rolodex, and it felt like losing your social life. The weather report came from your local weatherman, pointer stick in hand, green screen barely holding together. He looked like someone's uncle, And when he said chance of rain, you packed both an umbrella and sunscreen just in case. Exercise wasn't boutique gyms or apps. It was Jane Fonda workout tapes on VHS. Spandex tighter than your future, pastel leotards, and shag carpet bouncing under your sneakers. Synth music, sweatbands, and the war on calories smelled faintly of Aquanet. And then came Sunday nights. Bath done, pajamas on, school clothes laid out. The Disney Sunday movie lit up the screen on ABC as Tinkerbell touched the castle with her wand. For 1 hour the world paused. Family, magic, and tomorrow's school day waiting just beyond the credits. And maybe, just maybe, you had your first date at the mall. Pizza in the food court, a movie after, nerves buzzing. If the night ended with a kiss, you floated for a week. No apps, no swipes, just courage, hope, and the thrill of trying. The 1980s were bold, bright, and unforgettable. But if you're ready to step even further back, into soda fountains, drive-in theaters, milkmen, and streetlights guiding kids home, it's time to visit the 1950s. Click the video on your screen, and let's rewind even further. The 1980s were bold, bright, and unforgettable. Every sticker, every song, and every laugh in a mall food court still lingers in memory. It was a decade of neon dreams, small joys, and moments that felt larger than life. But sometimes the best way to understand one era is to step back into the one that came before. Click the video on your screen, and let's rewind together to the 1950s.